Up first, he's talking about the science of happiness. His favorite movie is The Notebook. And he once ate 20 baby carrots in 10 minutes.
Hello. Whoa, that's kind of loud. All right. Hey, everybody. Like I said, I'm Matt, and my goal is just to keep at least half of you here for the next talk. So I decided to do this talk because a professor posed the question, can money buy happiness? And it made me realize that to answer that question, you need to know what happiness is, and it's not that easy a question to answer. But before I get into that, things I'm not going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about depression, bipolar disorder, or any sort of mental illness. And I'm not going to talk about spiritual happiness, because those are both a lot deeper and more complex than anything I've got time to go into. So with that being said, what is happiness? Charles Schultz said that it's a warm puppy. John Lennon said that it's a warm gun, but John Lennon was kind of weird. But when it comes down to it, it's not an easy question to answer. And in fact, it's one that the answer has changed for throughout history. But we can get a little idea about what it is by just looking at the word itself, happiness. The root word hap is the same root that you see in happen, haphazard, and hapless. And it implies some sort of randomness or chance. And in fact, hap means luck or fortune. So how does a word that means luck end up being the word that we use to describe a warm, fuzzy feeling inside? Well, the story goes back to ancient Greece, where happiness was seen not as an emotion at all, but as prosperity and fortune. The Greek word that's usually translated to mean happiness literally means good spirit or good God, because happiness was literally being blessed by the gods. So it meant fortune. It was an external force. It wasn't something that you could just be. It was something that had to be thrust upon you. And it was attainable only by a select few. These two here are Socrates and Aristotle, and they had a slightly different view of what happiness meant. They said that happiness was virtue or excellence. Happiness was essentially being the best at everything that you do. And Aristotle went into some detail about what virtue meant to him. Everything was based on moderation and emphasized friendship, proper ambition, patience, moderation, generosity, and health, among a lot of other things. And so with this definition, happiness is both an external and an internal thing. There are a lot of things like friendship that need to come from within, but other things like prosperity and wealth that come from outside. And again, this was attainable only by the select few. A common man could never aspire to necessarily be happy. Happiness again changed during the Middle Ages. This is St. Augustine up here. And he wrote that happiness is not attainable in this lifetime. So throughout the entire Middle Ages, happiness was seen as literally heaven. It wasn't that heaven is a happy place. It wasn't that you'll be happy once you're in heaven. Literally, heaven was a synonym for happiness. And so, again, this is back to an external force, something that you can't control from within. And it wasn't attainable at all on the earth. It was attainable only by God's chosen people after life. And this definition lasted for over 1,000 years and only began to change during the Reformation, when it was still seen as a godly thing, but it became attainable by the common man. This here is St. Thomas, and he wrote about happiness as something that is attainable on earth by all of God's chosen, but it was still a theocratic value that came from outside. It really didn't become something close to what we see it today until one man, probably someone who has more to do with what happiness means in America than any other man, and someone we're all pretty familiar with, good old TJ. It's UVA, it had to come back to Thomas Jefferson, right? But when he wrote in the Declaration of Independence that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, he launched America on a mission to pursue happiness in every aspect of life. And it's important to note, too, that for him, happiness still didn't mean a warm, fuzzy feeling. It meant prosperity or wealth, and that was roughly synonymous with John Locke's life, liberty, and property. So it's still an external feeling, but for the first time, happiness was attainable by everyone. It was finally democratized. And it was this democratization of happiness that really led to the American dream, to manifest destiny, and to the vast pursuit of happiness that we have today. From that point, it gradually changed to our modern meaning of happiness. But if you had to pick a point where everything switched over, it would probably be the 1920s. In the 1920s, a lot of people place that as the birth of modern commercialism. And for the first time, America was the most prosperous place on the planet. We were coming out of World War I. We had money flowing everywhere. And you could basically buy anything that you needed. If you had a want or a need, you could buy something to fix it. You could buy freedom with a Model T. You could buy privacy with your own house. You could even buy love with jewelry. And so it doesn't come as a huge surprise that people started to see that you could buy happiness. Advertising, not coincidentally, changed a lot in that period too. On the left is an ad from before 1920, where a lot of times they might have an image of the product and a listing of the benefits of the product. But after that, they started emotional advertising. They would picture a smiling face next to the product and allow the consumer to make the connection that this product will make you merry, this product will make you happy. And that trend has really continued to today, when I can buy happiness in a box, I can open a bottle of happiness, I can even drive happiness. So you can see throughout history how happiness has changed from an external feeling, something that's attainable only by a select few people, and something that is really this external value, to something that means feeling good, an internal value, something that's attainable by everyone. So now I'm going to change gears a bit and talk about the science of happiness. What does science tell us that it is? And from here on out, when I say happiness, I'm going to mean this definition, the modern feeling good definition. So what determines whether you're happy? Well, according to studies, about half of it is your genes. Nothing you're going to change there. It's preset from the beginning. Hopefully you got good genes. Another 40% is intentional activities, and I'll get back to what that is in a little bit. And then that last 10% sliver is life circumstances. And I think that last one is the most interesting, because that is what I tend to think of when I think of what's going to make me happy. It's like, who in here has ever thought, if I just blank, then I'll be happy? If I just get that grade, that job, that house, that girlfriend, then I'll be happy. But it turns out that only affects about 10% of your happiness. And that's because of something called hedonic adaptation, which is a really fancy term for saying that eventually you're going to reset to your set point of happiness, that money doesn't really buy happiness, that your circumstances only affect a small amount of your happiness. So for example, if you win the lottery, your happiness is going to spike. You're a millionaire overnight. You're going to blow cash in Vegas. It's fun. But pretty quickly, your expectations change. You realize that your relationships haven't changed, and your happiness value resets to its set point. Might be a sad thing there, but what if you get in an accident? What if you get fired from your job? Well, it's the same thing. Your happiness is going to plummet, but then it's going to go back up to its resting value. A little lower resting value if you cheer for the Redskins, but other than that, I'll be ready for the Eagles quotes later on. And I guess this is a convenient place to ask the question, does money buy happiness? And the maybe surprising answer is yes, to a point. So most studies will say that up to a certain point, more salary equates to more happiness. And people can't agree on that value. Most studies put it between $40,000 and $75,000. And that's basically the point at which money is not a determining factor in every decision you make every day. You don't worry about the bills. You don't worry about whether you can afford these groceries or these clothes. But beyond that, money makes almost no difference in your happiness. So what about the other 40%? Well, that's a little tougher to define. A bunch of studies have looked into it. I don't generally believe studies that come with a book deal, but a lot of them agree on a few big points. And the first one is relationships. That one's pretty obvious, but the interesting thing for me was that it doesn't matter how many relationships you have. That has almost no effect on your happiness. It's about having 3 to 5 close, deep relationships. And that's really the biggest determining factor. Another is in setting goals. And the yes, find the nearest soccer field, you'll be happy. But again, the interesting thing here is that it's not about achieving those goals. It's just about striving for something that makes you happy. Some others that most studies show are thankfulness, spirituality, and religion, which is not a prerequisite for happiness, but is strongly correlated with it. Generosity, and taking care of your body, exercise, diet, getting enough sleep. And all of these are habitual behaviors that affect happiness. And one more interesting one to me is smiling, which you tend to think of as the external representation of being happy, but it's actually a positive feedback loop where if you smile, it will make you happier. And it's an interesting effect that you're bringing up. So if you're feeling sad one day, try weirdly smiling around. You might look like him, but maybe you'll be happier. But the point of all of this is that happiness is habitual. It's not something that you can just open in a bottle. It's not something that you can get from seeing a cool view or watching a cool movie or petting a puppy. It's a habit that you form. And it's from relationships, goal setting, spirituality, thankfulness, generosity, exercise, just many of the things on this list. But what I find interesting about that is it doesn't fit very well with our common feeling good definition of happiness. That's a very instantaneous and like instant gratification sort of view. But these seem a lot more similar to what these guys talked about. And if you look at them side by side, the modern happiness science and Aristotle's doctrine of means, there's a really striking similarity between the left and the right side. And so in the end, I feel like when we talk about what makes us happier, we're probably asking the wrong question. Because the right question is what happiness is in the first place. Thank you.